So, non-duality. Where shall we start? Let's start with what is. There's just this. There's just this. That's as good a place to start as any. This is the entirety. What is what's happening, or what's appearing to happen. To the person, as long as it seems like there is a person, that may sound like a fantastical statement, because the person lives in something called time, and also something else called space, and in time there are other things than just this. There's a past and a future, so there's lots and lots of other things in time. And the person lives in something called space, and of course in space there are many, many, many other things and places than what there is simply arising in this. So it's very challenging in a way to say that this is all there is. There's just this, because in saying this there's a kind of denying of space, and there's a denying of time. So the person lives in space and time. And what this whole meeting is about is the possibility of, we could say, seeing through the person. We could say that seeing that the person is a kind of illusion. We could use, and often use, analogy and say that the person, it's like a dream being. And we could say that this, what seems to be arising, is a kind of dream arising. It's not a bad analogy, because however shocking or strange or weird this communication might seem to the mind, it might seem to the mind, it might not, but to some minds it certainly seems strange and shocking. But however much that might be, the mind might be able to make sense of the analogy of a nighttime dream, because everyone has had a nighttime dream, so in a way everyone knows what it's like for an apparent experience to arise, which takes place over an apparent duration, in other words over time, which takes place in particular places, in other words throughout space. And yet as soon as the person wakes up and that dream is over, it's recognised that none of that actually happened, that was simply a dream. You could say, well, it kind of did happen. Well, yeah, it kind of did happen, only, however, as a dream. The time and the space in that dream were, we could say, a kind of illusion, if you like. So the suggestion here is that when there's this other kind of awakening that we talk about, this awakening not from a nighttime dream, but an awakening to the reality that this is, we could call it the daytime dream if we want to, there can be that recognition that, if you like, what this is, it's a kind of parallel to the dreamed character in the nighttime dream. It's very easy when we wake up in the morning to recognise that the dreamed character in the nighttime dream was a dreamed character, that nothing that it apparently experienced actually happened. It's much more difficult to recognise that this is a waking dream. In other words, it's an appearance, just as the nighttime dream is an appearance. It's not simply unreal in the sense of non-existent. Something is appearing to happen. This isn't non-existent. Something is appearing to happen, but it's an appearance, and there can be a waking up to that. There can be a waking up to the recognition that whatever this thought it was is an illusion, and what this actually is, well, we have to look around for a phrase, an analogy, a parallel of some kind, an image, it doesn't matter. But that what this actually is, we could say, is a character. It's like a character in a play, a character in a dream, a character in a book, if you like, with an apparent life that seems to be unfolding from a past into a future in something apparently called time, but actually, and I'm going to suggest before I say the next line, which I've already said at the beginning, which actually the mind can hear this as incredibly obscure, mad, how can that be, and yet in another sense I always suggest is absolutely obvious, right? So there seems to be this person, character actually, who seems to have a life unfolding in something called time and space, but actually, going back to the beginning again, this is all there is. This is all there is. No time, no space, simply what appears to be happening. And as I say, the suggestion from here is that however challenging that statement might be on one level, on another level it's in the realm of what I always call the bleeding obvious. That in a sense it's absolutely obvious that all there is this. No past, no future. Where's a second ago? Doesn't exist. Where's a quarter of a second ago? Doesn't exist. Where's a millionth of a second ago? Doesn't exist. There is simply just this. We could call this is a bit fanciful, but as it's just popped into my head, I'd use this image. It's only an image. We could call this the sliver of light in the darkness. This is the sliver of light in the darkness. So this can be seen. It's a strange phrase to use. This can be seen. No subject to it. I'm not saying you can see this, I can see this. Someone somewhere else can see this. I'm deliberately avoiding that. This can be seen. No subject in that sentence. Not John or Tim or Richard or Rosie can see this, but this can be seen. Why am I putting it this way? Because this can be seen only when Tim or Roger or Rosie or Fred, or I can't remember the names I used, or Richard, only when the person, whatever their name is, collapses and disappears. The suggestion from here is it is possible for the apparent person who seems to have a life which unfolds in time and space, it's possible for the sense of that person simply to collapse. And that this is what I sometimes call the mystical apprehension. If you want to look for voices about this, voices which are spoken about this, voices that are written about this in all sorts of traditions, in all sorts of apparent times, in the unfolding of apparent history, then you'll find it in the mystics. You won't tend to find it if you look into spirituality. You won't tend to find it if you listen to the conversation of spiritual people, which will tend to be mostly about how I can become somebody else, how I can become a better me. But you'll find it in the rare and infrequent voices of the mystics. The reason they're rare and infrequent is because in the story of history, in the story of humanity unfolding, mystics did rather get a bad deal and were quite often simply put to death for saying something which was considered to be highly unsavoury. And we could say that's still happening today. So my favourite Christian mystic, Marguerite of Porret, who I quote far too often, until I see that I am nothing, I cannot see that I am everything. Until I can see that I am nothing, I cannot see that I am love. Really, really important. I'll come back to that. So she was silenced by the church by the very effective means of burning her. But that last thing that I just mentioned, until I see that I am nothing, I cannot see that I am love. That's the kind of real key to what's being said here. When this is seen, it's seen that everything's empty, and I mean everything. When this is seen, it's seen that the easiest way to put this is that that is empty. In other words, what appears to be out there is empty, but also that this is empty. In other words, what appears to be in here is also empty. And because they're both empty, there's no such thing as both. Because out there is empty and in here is empty, there's the same. So there is no out there and there is no in here. And the seeing of that is often described, or sometimes described, as awakening. It tends to bring about profound changes. It doesn't necessarily have to, but it tends to. But there's something else, and the something else is the seeing that out there is empty, in here is empty, so they are the same thing. There is no such thing as in here and out there, but they're also full. And what they're full of, well, no phrase gets it. I and quite a lot of other people might use the phrase, use the phrase unconditional love. Use any phrase we like, but that for some of us seems to get closest to it. So there's no rules about this at all, absolutely no rules at all. Nevertheless, it's quite common that when what we might call awakening happens, first there can be a seeing that everything's empty, and then there can be a seeing that everything is both empty and full, and the fullness is unconditional love. This is a complete mystery. I mean, I feel like throwing in, if any of us in this room, including myself, by the way, if any of us in this room think we're understanding this, we're not. You know, it can't be understood. You know, it's sort of wrestling around with approximations of words, trying to approach this, because some of us enjoy communicating about it, some of us enjoy hearing about it, some of us enjoy talking about it. But in a way, it's hopeless. Because nothing I've said, nothing anybody's said can get close to it. We're just kind of approximating, using these words. Maybe we're getting sort of 2 or 3 million light years closer to what we're talking about, rather than 50 billion light years away. But that's about the best we can do. So there's nothing, and it's all the same, and there's everything, and it's all the same, and nothing and everything are the same. And what the everything consists of is unconditional love. It's an outpouring of unconditional love, emptiness and fullness. And then that's either seen or not. There's a few lines in the Upanishads. I don't quote the Upanishads very often for a very good reason. I don't really know them very well at all. But there's a few lines in the Upanishads I came across that really struck me, and as I quote quite often: the lightning strikes, the eye blinks, then you've either seen or you have not seen. And awakening can be like that. It doesn't have to be, but awakening can quite often be like that. It's just like a flash, and then it's gone, and then it's like, what the hell was that? So those few lines from the Upanishads then continue. So The lightning flashes, the eye blinks, then you have either seen or you have not seen. If you have not seen, too bad. Which seems a bit harsh, and yet also puts very clearly, I'm going to say something then can immediately change it, which puts very clearly there is nothing that you can do about it. You either see it or you don't. But then I'm going to immediately change it, of course, because there is no you anyway. So it's not that there's nothing you can do about it, it's that there's nothing that can be done because there is no you. So sometimes, but not always, that's what awakening is like. The lightning flashes and the eye blinks. And sometimes emptiness is seen, but not fullness. And sometimes, on a different occasion, in the dream of time that does not exist, in the dream of time for a dream character, there may be another flash of lightning, or however we want to put it, in which not just the emptiness of everything is seen, but also its fullness. So I think I'll just throw one last thing in, and then I'll stop with the introductory talk and see what happens. So something that I quite often say at this point. So when this is fully seen, the nature of, I'll put it this way, the nature of everything as unconditional love is seen. The difficult word in that phrase, unconditional love, is not the word love, it's the word unconditional. And that is very, very challenging. So I'll suggest that in some way or other, everyone has some kind of handle on what the word love means, in some way or other. I mean, maybe not the psychopaths, but the psychopaths are very unlikely to be at a meeting about non-duality, because there isn't going to be anything in it for them. Well, there isn't actually anything in it for anyone, but that's a different point. So that's a suggestion. You can contradict me if you want to, but I would suggest that everyone has a handle on what love means. The difficult word in that phrase, because it absolutely does not fit with the way that the mind, which doesn't exist, but we'll come to that later if we want to. Let's for the moment pretend that there is such a thing as a mind. It really doesn't conform to the way the mind is constructed and the way the mind works, is that idea of unconditionality. Because the mind always operates within a world of conditionality. In other words, in a world of, I'll take the heat out of it for a moment, rather than using the word love, I'll say the mind always lives or works in a world of conditionality, like and dislike, opposites. Put the heat back in, love and hate. So unconditional love, it's really tough. I mean, it might sound a bit woo-woo-y and pink and fluffy and cotton wool and angels and so forth, and channeling and lovely unconditional love. It's not. That word unconditional, if we think about it, it embraces everything. If it doesn't embrace everything, it's not unconditional. And the mind doesn't operate like that. The mind isn't unconditional. The mind can only know conditional love. There are all sorts of things that the mind will have which are excluded from love. And so to suggest to the mind that unconditional love means that these things are included is, well, to some minds it's an absolute insult. To most minds it's very, very challenging at the least. And the mind will want to argue with that, probably. Some minds will. A lot of minds at meetings tend to want to argue with that point. No, that can't, I mean, surely, well, what about this and what about that? And bringing up the things that the mind most feels are the opposite of love. But unconditionality is unconditionality. It excludes nothing. As soon as we've excluded one thing, then conditionality. So this is not something that the mind can understand. It's not something that the mind can reconcile itself with even, but it is something that can be directly seen. The nature of unconditional love can be directly seen. We had a little conversation before we started about philosophy and well, you know, we could have 20 or 200 books philosophically examining what that phrase could possibly mean and why it's not true or why it is true or blah 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 blah, unconditional love, and it's all irrelevant. What the mind thinks about that is irrelevant when it's seen. And really all that can be said about it is when it's seen, end of story. And it's the seeing of unconditional love, it's the seeing of the nature of everything arising from unconditional love that seems to finally put an end to seeking, finally put an end to the dissatisfied person going, it's not this, it's not this, it's not this, it can't be this, it must be that over there, why can't I find it, it must be that over there. That kind of haunted searching which so many of us have gone through. That's when it finally stops, when it's seen that miraculously, wondrously, and in a way that the mind can't itself understand or fathom, this is an outpouring of unconditional love. And I think it's probably a good point to stop there. And hand it over. See if we have any questions, comments, discussion, or not.
Richard, you said directly seen. When it is seen, when this is seen, and then I think you said directly seen at some point. Directly seen means not seen by the individual.
In essence, yes. I mean, actually that word directly is kind of redundant. I mean, if it's seen, it's seen. But I'm just sort of trying to reinforce, you know, this is something which springs up and it's incontrovertible. And it's not seen, indeed it isn't seen by the individual. So the obvious question is, well, who's it seen by then? You know, that's mad, it's not seen by the individual. Who's it seen by? Yeah, it is mad. It's seen by no one. It can only be seen when the individual isn't there. Yeah. There's something about the contracted individual that blocks out the view of non-duality, of oneness. Yeah.
So the individual is the ultimate filter.
Yes, and in a way the only filter, the only real filter. Yeah. And let's not reify the individual by talking about what we're talking about as if it's a thing. It's inevitable that we talk about it like that, but let's de-reify it. Of course, the individual isn't a thing. The individual is just this continual process of, we could say, continual process of contraction. I nearly said then, the individual is this continual process of mind chatter, but that's misleading, because the mind chatter can cease and yet the contraction can still be there. There's a kind of energetic contraction that exists even if the mind, or may exist, even if the mind is temporarily quietened. So for example, if the mind is quietened, that may bring some peace, but it doesn't by any means necessarily bring the seeing of nothing and everything. Yeah.
You talk about attachments in one of your books, and how you don't really agree with detachment in Buddhism and that kind of thing. Would you say when you had a realization did you see through attachments, or was?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I didn't see through attachment, but I think in that, in that, whatever we want to call it, words fail me. I'm going to just settle for a moment, just for the sake of it. There's no such thing as attachments, because the one to whom attachments attach isn't there. Now, they may then well come back.
Yeah.
Yeah. Detachment is a completely different matter, and detachment is detachment is. I'm still surprised. I get the emails and communications and phone calls with people, and they've been with teachers who are still sort of suggesting processes of detachment, which I think a tremendously unhealthy thing to do.
Because it's a person.
It's a person going around going, I don't care, I'm detached. Yeah. But I do make this distinction. I wish more people would make it. I do make this distinction between detachment and non-attachment. I mean, you've got attachment, I want that car, or whatever it might be. Detachment, which is like a forceful kind of, no, I'm not going to pay any attention to that. I mean, if you look at the some of the Buddhist ways for monks to deal with lust. You see a pretty girl walking down the street. Well, you're a Buddhist monk, you shouldn't see her because you should have your eyes on the pavement anyway, but if you happen to see the pretty girl, how do you deal with that? Through this really bizarre process of detachment by visualising all sorts of things which I'm not going to go into because it's not my business, but it seems to me profoundly unhealthy and unhelpful, but it produces this kind of detachment. But this is something that the person owns. The person owns attachment, the person owns detachment, and neither of those has anything to do with non-attachment, which is something which is accepting. Non-attachment is accepting. Detachment is repelling. And I mean, with the kind of that Buddhist technique, it kind of relies on conjuring up mental images of that which is repulsive. So it really is repelling in a very literal way. Non-attachment is accepting. It's not repelling, it's not trying to draw towards, it's not trying to push away, it's just accepting. Non-attachment. Stuff comes, stuff goes. Pretty girls come, pretty girls go. Fame comes, fame goes, whatever it might be. Non-attachment is a kind of lack of concern. It's not a repulsing, it's not a pushing away. And it can only arise naturally. The apparent person can apparently develop detachment extremely unhealthily, but nevertheless it can be done. Non-attachment arises naturally or it doesn't. It's no better than attachment, but it might be more comfortable. There's no better or worse than this, but there is a recognition that there may be comfortable and uncomfortable.
Richard, would you say, you said attachment and then detachment. Detachment can probably be close to mental dissociation as well. Yeah, they can be. Yeah. Although they're different things, in my opinion, they can be sort of people start to.
They are different, but
bunch them together. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
What were your views on Ramana Maharishi and his teachings, communications?
I don't really have much of a view. So that's where the tradition, the self-inquiry tradition, comes from.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you the view I've got, but it's just a view. It's just an opinion. It's not based on anything, right? Okay. people gather round you, in this case Ramana Maharshi, and then more people gather round, and then more people gather round, and before you know it, you just sat down somewhere to meditate and went into samadhi or whatever, and stayed there or whatever. More and more people gather round or whatever. Before you know it, you've got an ashram. You've got to do something. You've got to give people something to do. They want something to do. Tell me, oh Master, what can I do so that I can become like you are, you know? So eventually you have to give them something to do, or they'll make mischief, or whatever. And so we end up with self-inquiry. That's my view. I'm not saying it's correct. I'm just saying it seems to me as likely as any. You know. Do you get what I'm?
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do.
When you go and live in an ashram and follow with deep devotion to the guru, why do you have to do seva? You know, work, duty for the guru, whatever. Well, one reason's obvious. You know, that things have to get done in the ashram. You know, meals have to be cooked, toilets have to be scrubbed, food has to be grown, gardens have to be tended. The buildings have to be painted, so that's one reason to do seva, but the other reason to do it is that if you don't do that, then people will get up to all sorts of mischief. You know, it's a way of keeping people busy, occupied, tired, use up their energy to stop them getting up to too much mischief. Is this sounding terribly cynical?
Sounds true.
That's my view, but I don't really know about Ramana. I don't know. It does seem strange that, you know, he should tell people to do what he told them to do. Seems weird to me. But, you know, kept them busy, kept them occupied if they wanted something to do. It's a bit cruel, I suppose, you know, if people want something to do, it's a bit cruel to say, well, there isn't anything. But it is true. And you could spell that out a bit more by saying, and by the way, of course, there is no one who can do anything. So then why not add, look for the one who doesn't exist. Self-inquire and look for the one who doesn't exist, who can't do anything. Yeah.
He does talk about how I is an illusion in some of his books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Muktananda's kind of an interesting case for several reasons, but the one that's relevant to this one is, I mean, he went to stay in a Muktananda ashram and became a devotee of his. There was masses of doing all the time, you know, apart from seva, there'd be Kashmiri shavers and philosophy classes and classes on this, class on that, It was a really kind of, you know, busy kind of, a busy day you could have as an ashramite with Muktananda. And I'm looking for the quote in my head, and I'm not coming up with the exact quote, but towards the end, I think it was, you are all God, if only you could see it. But the one I'm really looking for was that he said to some of his senior people, when you get this, you will be so angry with me. I think that's beautiful, it's wonderful. In other words, it's all been a glorious waste of time.
Yeah, I think Maharaj said something like that on his deathbed. He said something like, forget what I've told you,
Yeah.
piss on my body and
Yeah.
something else.
Yeah, this is a way of passing the time.
Yeah.
So you go to Muktananda's ashram, you study Kashmiri Shaivism, you meditate, you blah 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 blah, you tend to go, it's a way of passing the time. With Ramana, you self-inquire or whatever, it's a way of passing the time. And then it becomes a fetish. So it's obvious now, if you go on the internet or you go to certain speakers, or it's obvious that self-inquiry has been fetishized. Yeah. And it may have, I've no idea, I have no idea, I've never practiced self-inquiry. It may have some therapeutic value. I mean, there are, so put that down to make the air quotations, there are spiritual techniques which definitely have, or definitely in some cases, have therapeutic value. Mindfulness, for example, is one of them. But then, eventually, and usually around institutions, like maybe a charismatic teacher who gathers a lot of followers and in a sense becomes an institution in themselves, these techniques can then become fetishized. And before long you have wars about them, you have non-duality wars around self-inquiry, to self-inquire or not to self-inquire, as Shakespeare did not write. To self-inquire or not to self-inquire? Well, the simple way through that conundrum is there's no one who self-inquires, so self-inquiry will either happen or it won't. And again, in a sense, that is in the realm of the bleeding obvious, because in the realm of the bleeding obvious, either an energy will come up which feels attractive to self-inquiry, or it won't. There's nobody making that decision.
That's what that book, Free Will, kind of helped for me to realise.
Yeah. Yeah.
And watching Sam Harris's videos, because he's so clear on it, and he explains it very well.
He does, he explains it beautifully. And again, it's a topic which can generate the most furious heat. To deny free will, it seems like an assault on not everything, but a great deal of what the person, the one who feels separate, the one who feels I am an autonomous individual, feels is most precious. After all, what does it mean to be an autonomous individual? It means I have the ability to make choices. I have free will. It's so deeply ingrained in us that to challenge that is a really easy way to start an argument, to challenge that.
Yeah, he puts disclaimers on some of his videos because he's had such
Saying what?
reactions.
Trigger warnings, you mean,
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
yeah.
Saying, if you're of a nervous disposition, don't watch
Yeah,
this video.
basically.
Yeah, in some ways, more of a warning is needed on those videos than even graphic content. Please watch with caution, yeah.
Maybe.
Because it's really, to
Yeah.
not have free will, there's no one there.
It challenges
Everything.
all your values. Possibly. Maybe it challenges all your values. Yeah. I mean, I've had a little example of this recently, actually. I go to a little local kind of sort of social, it's a non-duality group, but it's sort of social. Nobody leads it, there's no fixed point of view, everybody just chips in or whatever. It's a nice social game, lots and lots of range of view. And because I feel sometimes a little bit provocative, there's a WhatsApp group, and because I feel a little bit provocative sometimes, I recently posted a chapter from my last book about free will, which basically is simply a chapter, going through the fact that free will doesn't exist and the reasons why it can't exist and blah 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 blah. So I posted this, and within, I don't know how long it was, I can't remember if it was 5 minutes or an hour or whatever, I had somebody else in the group posted a reply which I would describe as incandescent with rage. So it's a real, but you can see why. It's what we're talking about here strikes more deeply at who we think we are, even than the suggestion that free will doesn't exist, because it strikes at everything. It destroys everything that we think we are. But if you take that out of the picture and just go for the much more small thing of free will, that really does in itself strike very much at what people think they are and their sense of morality. So James B. Maher's book is quite interesting because he goes quite deeply into the suggestion that, contrary to what the kind of ordinary mind might think, if we abandoned our belief in free will, it would probably be quite good for us as in terms of our group life, in terms of society. I mean, it's not relevant to what we're talking about here, so I won't go into it, but there are good reasons for arguing that to abandon free will would probably lead to a kinder and more empathic world.
That's exactly what Sam Harris said.
Yes.
There's no reason to blame anybody because
Yes.
there's no responsibility. So you wouldn't have tribalism or anything.
Yeah. So we might treat each other a little bit more mercifully, maybe. I mean, yeah. But for most people, it's just infuriating to be told there's no free will.
I think when I first heard about no free will from yourself or in these meetings, it was definitely something that really challenged the sense of me,
Yeah.
the sense of I.
Yeah.
Because if free will isn't there,
Yeah.
then what is all that thinking? Avoid this, do this,
Yeah.
run away from that, have some more of that,
Yeah.
and it all
Yeah.
starts to, doing starts to
Yeah.
collapse, yeah?
If you take the free will question out of the context that we're here to talk about, non-duality, in a way, you can see the kind of deadly insult in it, the challenge in it, because what it's positing is that there is a person there, right, but that person is helpless, There is a person there, there's a real person there, there's an individual there, but you're just, what are you? I don't know, you're just some sort of cipher, robot, whatever it might be, kind of real person but helpless, which is a pretty horrifying kind of thought. That isn't, of course, what I'm saying. Because although I think it's very easy to kind of dismantle the whole concept of free will simply, philosophically, logically, it's very, very easy to dismantle it. That's not the point here. The point here is that, in a sense, it simply becomes irrelevant, because what this is saying is not there's no free will. What this is saying is there's no person. So free will doesn't even come into it.
Big difference.
There's a huge difference between saying it's the difference between saying there is an impotent person who exists there and there is no one. That is a vast difference. I mean, they're in different galaxies, really, yeah.
One is kind of nihilism, I suppose. Impotent person, can't do anything.
Yeah, absolutely,
The other
yeah.
one is something else, yeah.
And I mean, non-duality is often accused of being nihilistic. I have been accused of being nihilistic, but I think maybe accusation's a bit too... No. Anyway, I've certainly been accused of being nihilistic and so forth. It couldn't be. It's such a huge misunderstanding. But it does arise out of that. What you can see is a fairly easy misunderstanding to make, although it's huge, that what this is saying is that there's Fred and Pete and Imran and Richard and Susie and Sally, and we are helpless, powerless individuals. Well, that does certainly sound nihilistic, but that's not what's being said. Also, I've never come across a nihilist who's in any terms suggested that the fundamental nature of everything is unconditional love. That doesn't tend to go with nihilism or existentialism. I love existentialism, but this is not existentialism.
Yeah.
I mean,
you've got nihilism,
yeah,
unconditional love.
yeah.
They're so different.
They're a bit different, aren't they? Yes. Yeah.
There's a whole concept of religion as well. I have family members who are religious.
Yeah.
It's all about don't do this, do this, don't Use your free will to not do these things, and do these things and attain something in the future. Good heaven.
Yeah. This is another reason why to deny free will is so offensive to so many people, because of course it renders religion
obsolete.
I'm looking for an image. It's like a magic trick, isn't it? I mean, religion is like a magic trick, and what this does is it sort of switches the lights on, or it takes away the cloth that is hiding how the magic trick's done, so that the magic trick just collapses, and you just see that, oh well, it's just a trick. And free will, the other way around, most religion, not all, to be fair, but most religion makes no sense at all without an assumption of free will, because most religion is based on the idea of punishment or reward for bad or good choices that we have made, and almost every word I just said there is wrong.
So God had made me so I couldn't actually do the right thing all the time.
Say that again.
All these rules I had to obey, it was impossible for me to obey all of them. So I had to try as hard as I could and fail.
Yes.
Feel guilty.
Yeah, but then that makes room for a compassionate, merciful God to come in and forgive you. Yeah.
It's interesting, it might be the pinnacle, so parenting, parents might, reward you or punish you, and then school, reward and punishment, and then religion, the ultimate reward and punishment.
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, in monotheistic religions, the kind of God image, whatever it is based on the father figure, usually, the father figure, not the mother figure, who is by and large alternately angry and loving.
Do you think the people who maybe originally but like Jesus, for example, the people who the religion stemmed from, they might have been speaking their truth, but then it just got convoluted along the way?
I mean, I have no idea. I mean, in the history, talking in conventional terms, in the history of humankind, I have no idea whether Jesus existed or not as a real human being. May or may not, may have been based on kind of fairly common Mediterranean resurrecting godlike beings or whatever. But certainly, what the church then taught seems to have very little to do with what either this air quotations, this real person or this fictional character, whichever it was, said or was reported to have said. So it got a bit convoluted there. Yeah, it's kind of,
Sam Harris also has a book on religion, and he completely kind of deconstructs it. And
he's got more than one. Which one are you?
On Faith, I think.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Have you read Letter to a Christian Nation? One of them. He's got The End of Faith, which is, as I remember it, is that more about Islam? I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he wrote it right after 9/11.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Letter to a Christian Nation, which is a little book, it's wonderful. Yeah. Oh, he's great. He's absolutely great. If you saw his I'm hesitant, I don't know what to call them. Cage fighting, I think I'll call them, with Jordan Peterson.
Oh, yeah.
He did these three debates with Jordan Peterson, which was basically like philosophical cage fighting. Wonderful.
Who won?
And
Who won?
Well, who won depended entirely on whose side you were on. They seem to have pretty much 50% of their followers each in the audience. And that's how it remained, yeah. I mean, to me, Sam Harris had all the arguments, but, there you go. But there was a wonderful moment, if I indulge myself, there was a wonderful moment where Sam Harris said to Jordan Peterson that Jordan, had once said it would take him 40 hours to answer the question, was Jesus literally resurrected? And Peterson agreed that he had said that, and then he went on to say, well, it's a very complicated question, blah, 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 blah. And Sam Harris just said, what's wrong with almost certainly not? That's just a wonderful moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's interesting, I mean, I have great admiration for Sam Harris on many, many issues, but it seems interesting nevertheless that to me he balks at the final step. He draws back from the final step in terms of what this and that and Sam himself actually is.
He does have some videos on the illusion of self, and he talks about when I think he went to meet somebody in Nepal. So he does have a spiritual side, but I think he separates that very much from religion.
Yeah. I think he's very keen on Dzogchen Buddhism, isn't he? And he's practiced it, so he's very keen on, there is this technique and practice this technique and da 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 da. I mean, nothing wrong with that, but also nothing right with it. Yeah.
His description of when he took MDMA when he was 18 kind of reminds me of when I took it, and when you were talking about seeing unconditional love, that's, I guess, is the closest I have felt to that, what I imagine that might feel like, to see that in everything, like all the barriers left. And,
yeah. I haven't taken MDMA, I've heard other people talk about it, and it does sound to me like there may well be some similarities, because I've taken other drugs, I've had lots of transpersonal experiences on other drugs. The difference for me be that no matter how transcendent the experience might be, there is always a me there having it, and that me might have been very translucent still, very translucent compared to the everyday, but nevertheless still there. So for example, I had a magic mushroom trip in Thailand, and the way I described it is for 5 hours I just sat in the sea and saw God, and I knew the secrets of the universe. Now, obviously by the next morning I had no idea what the secrets of the universe were, but for those 5 hours I knew the secrets of the universe and I saw God. But the point is, in the way I put it, I saw God. I knew the secrets of the universe. In other words, I was still there. That was not non-dual awakening. With MDMA and so forth, I don't know. I hear people talk about those and other drugs, and I think, yeah, well, maybe. Because it, does sound like maybe the person was totally absent, whereas, there's a huge difference between totally absent and 98% absent.
I did MDMA fairly recently, a week or two ago, in a therapeutic setting for the first time ever, and I have to say, everything about non-duality, when it doesn't go through the filter of the mind, basically non-duality made sense to no one. Non-duality took on a different meaning to how this was interpreting it before, and I'd say that MDMA is the biggest thing I've done. I've done other things as well.
The other thing I throw in is that non-dual awakening, God, that's such a strange phrase, awakening, liberation, whatever, is transformative. Permanently transformative. I don't know whether, what we're talking about here in terms of MDMA and so forth is, I have no idea. I can't comment.
My view now, and this wasn't, you see, when I encountered non-duality, then I thought, oh, let's do this, let's do 5-MeO and ayahuasca and get there somehow. My view now is that with all these things, it's always the individual doing it.
Yeah,
and it can help. It can help. It can create sort of peace and clarity that wasn't there before. It can create, the seeker's life can become much better.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
for
and this
me-
isn't about making our life better.
I know.
When this is seen, life might get better, it might get worse, it might stay the same. It's not about what I consider is good or useful for my life or what might lead me to have a happy life. It's not about that. It's not. It really isn't.
I would just say, with the taking MDMA and drugs, for me it was about 20 years ago, but I found it very addictive because I was chasing that spiritual awakening and reading lots about Maharaj and that kind of thing. But obviously, I think if you take those insights in a setting that's set up for that, then it can be helpful. But for me, it just turned into an addiction, and it wasn't very helpful. Eventually, it just kind of led on to more suffering.
Yeah, I found that. My first time I took LSD, it suddenly I understood there's some reality to religion, not the dogma I was brought up with, but there's something else. And I thought if I took the drug a few more times, I'd get deeper into it. But
It
actually,
seems-
the more times I took the LSD, the more confused I got.
Yeah.
So I didn't.
Because it seems like you're going somewhere, and then your mind thinks logically, I just have to do this more.
Yeah.
It doesn't work like that at all.
No.
I found there was a clarity that wasn't there before, and I'm going to be doing it like in a therapeutic setting with somebody,
Oh,
with
yeah.
someone sitting for those 4 hours and offering like guidance afterwards. So that's
Yeah.
better then. Because someone mentioned it in a non-duality meeting 2 or 3 weeks ago that, have you done MDMA? And I went, oh no, but I would like to do it with a therapist, and then someone
Yeah.
materialised. And I think it's better in a therapeutic setting.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I draw a comparison in that, for example, LSD, it can reveal that how we might think reality is normally constructed is just one version. Reality is fluid, it can be constructed in enormously different ways, largely dependent on, the kind of mechanism up here, what's affecting it and blah, 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 blah. So you can draw a parallel in the sense when, even a split second of awakening, it's like, my God, reality is nothing like this had always assumed it to be. So there is a parallel there, but it's not the same. But, the drugs can certainly sort of rattle and shake your cage. Yeah. And maybe in doing that, one of the padlocks will fall off the door. Maybe, yeah. Straight to camera, that is not a recommendation to take drugs. Trigger warning, trigger warning. Yeah.
Richard, what you said about in the ashram, seva, doing and things like that, I've come to a realisation that the me can't not think and can't not be doing something all the time, and myself included, but now I observe people, there are people that just doing and doing and doing and doing and doing, and sometimes there's people that can't even sit for a moment, they're workaholic people, and there's like this notion that if you don't do, then you're not existent, if you like. There's a relationship between getting somewhere, seeking, doing, and it's hard, I think, even when people, and myself included, when meditation happens or is done, it's uncomfortable initially because you're sitting there in silence, doing nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, you could say there's a sort of fundamental restless energy. Not necessarily for everyone all the time, but there's a fundamental restless energy, yeah. And there can be some therapeutic benefit from doing the meditation practice or something else, which calms that energy down for a while. But it's like therapy for the person. It's very different to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
What there is here, going back to what I was saying at the beginning, is absolutely just whatever's happening. Just stimuli, you could say, just perceptions, a voice, the noticing of the colour of a shirt, recognition of whether the temperature of the room is comfortable or not.
I think you said you've been doing these talks for about 20 years. I was just wondering if you ever have any feedback from people who don't come back here anymore, have awakened or whatever you want to call it. Or do you ever hear from anybody? Or
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. Well, what do you mean by feedback?
well, I don't know, it seems like for 20 years there must have been a lot of people who've come here and they must have, I guess their experiences of coming to some kind of final understanding.
Well, this hasn't got anything to do with understanding. I don't know how understanding could be final anyway. It seems to me understanding is always provisional, although the mind might not recognise it. Understanding can always change. It hasn't really got anything to do with understanding. I mean, to the mind, it can seem inconceivably unjust. So, for example, I can think of, I'm thinking of someone who's been to a lot of my meetings and was seeking in other ways for a long time before that, and I went to far more of Tony's meetings or whatever, and what did he say one day? He just said it seems so unfair. Seems so unfair. I think at that point he'd been seeking by his own reckoning for 40 years. He said it just seems so unfair. I've been seeking for 40 years and when somebody comes along to one, but there's no causation about this in any sense. Again, the mind hates that. There must be, surely, if I pray or meditate or go to enough meetings or show enough devotion to the Guru, surely that's going to make a difference. Well, no. And so it seems so unfair, so I may have been seeking, meditating, whatever, for 40 years, and then somebody is, I don't know, what usually pops into my mind at this point, I have no idea why, is somebody's buying a kettle in John Lewis, and bang, they're not there, and there's no one buying a kettle in John Lewis, and yet a kettle in John Lewis is nevertheless bought, which is all we're talking about. We're talking about the sudden recognition by no one that no one is doing anything, no one has ever done anything, and that can happen in the holiest temple, halfway up the holiest mountain in Tibet, or it can happen buying a kettle in John Lewis's. And if somebody cries out in agony at that, it seems so unfair. Yes, you bet it does to the mind. Of course it does. But notice that the mind is very canny, and the mind can very quickly make up a story which says, oh, well, it's fair after all. I don't have to live with that. I don't have to live with that apparent injustice. I've been self-inquiring under the guidance of a Ramana Maharshi teacher for 40 years, and nothing. And this young whippersnapper has just bought a kettle in John Lewis. I don't know why that stuck with me, but it has. The mind can very easily, very quickly make up a story to make that seem just, or several different stories. I mean, you could probably think of a few of them. I'm just sitting here thinking, do I even need to bother to name any of them because they're so obvious? Well, obvious ones. The first one is the karma from past lives. So it wasn't really just a kind of accidental awakening. Accident is. So I can't remember who else who said this, but it's not my original. Somebody, this is an accident waiting to happen. It either happens or it doesn't, like an accident. But that doesn't satisfy the mind. So okay, that young guy in John Lewis's, well, okay, maybe all he'd done in this life was buy a kettle, but there'd been 20 lives of dedication to Buddhist chanting before that, or whatever it might have been, So it's always possible for the mind to come up with a story that will justify anything. And the mind does want to cling to the hope, the basic hope of the mind is, I can do something about my predicament. I might not be sure what it is, but that's the basic hope of the mind. I can do something about my predicament.
But that doesn't make sense because the person doing that doesn't exist.
Exactly, yeah. Waking up or liberation is an accident, but certain things that we do can make us accident prone. That's a lovely one. See, that's the mind looking for some little crumb of hope.
Like saying the pathless path.
Yeah. I'm not sure if it's the same. I quite like that phrase, you know. I was thinking of maybe a bit like the other thing is like, so, of course we acknowledge that techniques and methods and so forth don't get you there or whatever, but nevertheless you can have a thorn to take out a thorn.
Yeah.
That one?
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Does that one come from Ramana? I'm not sure. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But it's the same thing. It's the mind clinging to hope. The mind going, okay, I recognise that that method won't get me there, and yet somehow method might get me there, even though I know it won't. Because you can use the thorn, the method, to take out the thorn, the sense of suffering that comes from I'm a person. So the mind's very, very canny, very complex and very intelligent, and none of that counts for anything, of course. But there's nothing wrong with any of that either.
Do you think some of that might have worked for some people?
No.
You just don't agree with that?
Well, there are no people, and
I meant, okay. Yeah.
no, I there's no way of knowing. I'm going to withdraw that no, and which came out a bit harshly, and I'm going to say simply it's unknowable. Like most things are unknowable, and that's unknowable. It can't be known.
You can never.
There was self-inquiry,
Yeah.
and then there was self-inquiry, and then there was awakening. Cause and effect. There was no self-inquiry, and then there was awakening. There was self-inquiry, and there was no awakening. There was no self-inquiry, and there was no awakening. I mean, I think I've covered the options there. It's unknowable.
Yeah.
It's unknowable. When I said no with that force, what it actually meant was it's unknowable. Like most things. I mean, actually, like almost everything, because actually this is what's known. It's not. It sounds extreme, but it's not too extreme. It's not extreme to say, yeah, this is what's known. This, what's happening. What's apparently arising. Everything else is unknown. Everything else is unknown. And some of what's unknown is also unknowable. They're not the same thing. The unknown and unknowable is not the same thing.
Because the unknown can become known.
The unknown can become known. The unknown may become known, and the unknowable is unknowable.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.